The curious case of Robert McBride. Why does the police ministry want to see the back of the now former IPID head? And what does the Freedom Front Plus offer South Africans who aren't Afrikaans and coloured? The PolitBureau is now in session. I'm Nicholas Bauer, connecting the dots for you on this Sunday. In the PolitBureau today. First up, after this week's battle in Parliament, Robert McBride has turned to the courts to keep his job as leader of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Police rubber-stamped Minister Bheki Cele's decision to not renew McBride's job as IPID head.
The ANC support the recommendation that the contract of the Executive Director of IPID, it should not be renewed for another term. That's what the committee today has in fact agreed. All of the members that were in this committee have accepted that recommendation. And the reasons became evident as we were going through all the discussion on the last from Monday until yesterday. It became evident when you look at the relationship between the IPID head and of course the minister is broken down. There's no relationship, there's no trust, there's no working together, that goes against the service delivery that need to be performed.
It wasn't even 24 hours after McBride's contract came to an end that the former acting police commissioner Khomotso Patlane was arrested on fraud and corruption charges. So who's in charge of policing the police? Robert McBride and Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Police were both invited to the show, but both declined due to the pending court challenge. Joining us in studio, though, is forensic investigator OSullivan and Executive Director of the Helen Suzman Foundation, Francis Antony. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your time this Sunday morning. Let me maybe start with you, Mr. Antony. This has been a ding-dong battle in the courts over Robert McBride's tenure and, of course, also his powers as IPID head. This has spanned different police ministers. Why exactly? Why is Robert McBride such a controversial person in the IPID role?
His controversy goes back many years. You recall that he was suspended for 1.5 years. Nobody quite knows why, but I suspect, as most people I think thought at the time, that he was uncovering certain matters which maybe have been sensitive. But what worries me about this matter, is that we're seeing an almost parallel process going forward here, which went forward in the case of Anwar Dramat when he was head of the Hawks. He was also suspended illegally, and it took us in the courts more than 2 years to get rid of his successor in Tlemeza. So there's this curious set of parallels going on with the Hawks in the past and now with IPID in the present.
So, Mr. Antony, you're essentially suggesting a usurping of the criminal justice system. Mr. OSullivan, let me bring you in here. Why, in your words, is Bheki Cele gunning for Robert McBride? I mean, Nathi Nhleko certainly didn't endear himself to IPID when he was police minister. One would have thought maybe things would have been different when Bheki Cele was in charge.
Yes, well, if you go onto our website, the Forensics for Justice website, we have a document there called Joining the Dots, which we initially published in December 2016, and it sets out chapter and verse as to why the criminal justice system had to be captured. Now, if you look at the role of IPID in the current criminal justice system, their role is watchdog of the police, and it's no good having a corrupt police force unless you also own IPID. So they had to control IPID, and that's why Robert McBride was suspended a few years ago. And he spent 18 months languishing at home whilst the politicians controlled IPID, and they shut down all the investigations into corrupt police officials. And the reason they did that was because the corrupt police officials were, in return for the favour, the quid pro quo, was that they were turning a blind eye to state capture. You can't succeed with a project of state capture unless you also own the criminal justice system.
You turned us to a website there. Are you suggesting you have hard proof of all that you're alleging here, that it was a capture of the criminal justice system and McBride was basically just standing in the way?
Yes, we have all the evidence. It's all set out on our website, and it's quite detailed evidence. And the problem we have now is, in fact, I've written to the the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and I've told them that they are now facilitating State Capture Mark II. Because what the State Capture Project failed to do in the previous period was to capture IPID. They captured it momentarily for a period of 18 months, and then the Constitutional Court reaffirmed the independence of IPID. And what they're doing now is they're trying to recapture IPID.
Francis, let me bring you in here. I mean, McBride's ascension to IPID head was initially not supported by opposition parties or NGOs. So how exactly has McBride proved himself and is forcing a fair amount of people to eat humble pie now?
I don't know about the opposition parties, I can't speak to them, but for us it was a clear matter of a violation of the rule of law when he was suspended. You've got to give the man the opportunity to prove himself, whether he...
But has he proved himself as IPID head?
I think he has.
In what way?
We have deposed already to the Zonda Commission. Our affidavits are there. Paul spoke about the capture of the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, with these events over the last few weeks, I don't believe that the criminal justice system is uncaptured. We were very pleased to see the appointment of the new head of the NPA, but the most important policing institution, body, is IPID, because it controls the police. It monitors the police, rather.
Paul, McBride is a controversial person. I mean, that's a fact. Never mind the Magoo bombing towards the end of apartheid. He was accused of gun running towards Mozambique in the late 90s. He resigned amid a cloud of controversy over drunken driving and abuse of process and power as Ikurulele Metropolitan Police Department head. Yet he's expected to be seen as an absolute paragon of virtue here. How?
Well, let's try and divorce ourselves from the man, and let's rather play the ball. Because it wouldn't matter, in my opinion, whether it was McBride or any other personality. If the person is acquitting themselves in the position effectively, and McBride was doing that, and the proof that he was acquitting himself effectively is that he was unlawfully suspended when he started putting his finger on certain cases. Coincidentally, he was suspended only a few weeks after Forensics for Justice opened a criminal docket against Mhlomeeza, the unlawfully appointed head of Hawks. And a week after, McBride told the then minister, which he shouldn't have done, he told the then minister, by the way, OSullivan's opened a complaint against Mhlomeeza, and on the face of it, there appears to be a case to answer. A week later, he was suspended.
Give us some of the examples of these cases that McBride has brought to the fore, because the other argument on the other side of the coin is that he is targeting certain aspects of the police and not having a holistic approach to policing the police as IPID head.
Well, you have to remember that McBride himself doesn't carry out the investigations. He's the manager, the executive director of IPID. But he has very competent people under his management. And it's very important in an organization like IPID that there's proper and effective leadership. And that should be ethical leadership. Otherwise, you have a situation where investigations, they don't gain traction. Now, we have a situation at IPID over the last, let's say, 3 years, where there was this hiatus of 18 months while McBride was on suspension. He came back from suspension. I met with him a week after he came back from suspension. He then gathered all the dockets that had been gathering dust, and action started taking place. So you have this situation today, or the cases that are pending, where millions and millions and millions of rand that was intended for effective policing in this country has been stolen by police officials from the police resources, and instead of being used for effective policing and the creation of the rule of law, has been used to pay bribes to get votes at ANC elective conferences.
Name one case for us specifically.
Well, look at Paklani, by way of example. Paklani is knee-deep, in fact neck-deep, in corruption. And look at, for example, the grabber. You know, a 4 million rand piece of equipment would have been sold to the police for 45 million rand, with the cash being pushed back so that it be carried in bags to the elective conference at Nasrec, which is exactly what happened at the elective conference in Bloemfontein.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it at that. We've run out of time this Sunday. I thank you very much for giving us your time on Sunday morning, and we'll wait to see what happens with this case, the curious case of Robert McBride and his tenure as IPID chief, that now heading to the courts, with him alleging essentially that Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Police was biased in their decision where they rubber-stamped Bheki Cele's announcement that McBride's contract would not be renewed. Coming up, what does the Freedom Front Plus have to offer voters as they launch their election manifesto this weekend? Their Western Cape Premier candidate, Peter Marais, joins us next.